Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is, honestly, incredibly simple, but just so deeply fascinating. We are breaking down the phenomenon of fruit cutting ASMR. We're going to explore exactly why millions of adults find this deep psychological peace in the, frankly, kind of absurd act of slicing toy Velcro plastic fruit. So if you're into calm, science-backed explanations, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's decode the mechanics of this super relaxing auditory experience. I want you to just think about it for a second. Picture a toy apple splitting apart, or, a plastic orange opening up into these neat little halves, or maybe a pretend strawberry separating right down the middle. The sound itself is small, maybe just a tiny click or a little plastic pop, but the feeling it produces, it can be surprisingly profound. So why do crisp sounds feel so clean? Why on earth does this tiny, seemingly insignificant little noise create such a surprisingly satisfying physical response for us? Well, fruit cutting ASMR doesn't just work by accident, right? It works because it delivers this incredibly precise 4-step sequence straight to the brain. Let's move to this and see how it builds. First up, you see the object. Your brain recognizes the shape instantly. Second, you predict the cut. You watch the hand moving, the pretend knife coming down, and you can literally feel the pressure building. Third, right at the absolute peak of that built-up pressure, bam, you get that crisp sound. And finally, step 4, you get a completely clean ending where the object neatly separates. And, that separation itself is what really matters here. Our brains absolutely love moments that finish cleanly. Just think about how a messy, lingering sound leaves your attention kind of searching for what just happened. It just feels unresolved, right? But a clean cut, that gives the brain a distinct beginning, a peak, and a really definitive ending. The sound doesn't drag on and on. It arrives, it completes the action, and then it just completely disappears. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact difference between an ASMR trigger and just regular, everyday sounds. Random noise, like the chaotic scribbles you see here, actually demands our attention because our brain literally has no idea what caused it. It forces your nervous system to do all this mental heavy lifting, scanning for the source just to make sure you're safe. But an ASMR cut invites attention. Why? Because the cause is 100% visible right in front of you. The visual of the fruit being cut explains the sound you're hearing, and in turn, that crisp sound confirms what you're seeing. It's that perfect match that signals to your brain that it can finally just relax. To really get into the nuts and bolts of the mechanics here, we have to look to neuroscience, specifically a framework known as predictive processing. Pioneered by neuroscientist Friston, this essentially describes our brain as a non-stop prediction machine. Your brain is literally always comparing what it expects is going to happen with the sensory evidence of what actually happens. So in fruit cutting ASMR, your brain makes a super simple prediction. Okay, the fruit will split and I'm going to hear a sound right at the exact moment of separation. When that simple prediction plays out exactly as expected, showing a perfectly clean result, your brain gets this deeply satisfying confirmation. It's basically a little micro reward for guessing right. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how clinical research actually maps perfectly onto this calming feeling. We're looking at 2 key studies here. First, Barratt and Davis, back in 2015, found that people very commonly use ASMR for things like relaxation, sleep, and just general mood support. Then, Poerio and her colleagues in 2018 found that people who respond to ASMR actually showed a physically reduced heart rate and improved affect while watching these videos. Now, I want to be super clear here. These studies do not prove ASMR as a clinical treatment for any medical condition whatsoever. Rather, they just neutrally validate that gentle sensory media really can have a measurable, calming physiological effect on certain people. Moving on to section 2. Visuals, toys, and safety, the ingredients of a perfect cut. You see, visual clarity is the absolute foundation of this ASMR trigger. First off, familiar fruit shapes like apples and bananas, they are instantly recognizable. This completely removes any mental work for the viewer. You don't need to process some complicated backstory to understand what's happening in the scene. Plus, using toy fruit instead of real fruit totally removes any real-world danger. Think about it. Real cutting involves sharp knives, physical tension, and usually a big mess. Toy cutting keeps that soothing, rhythmic motion, but strips away all the risk. And it's exactly this low-stakes quality that gives our tired or stressed-out attention a really simple, safe job. Literally just sit back, relax, and wait for the crisp sound. So the crucial point is that not just any sound is going to work here. The sound texture has to be absolutely perfect. If a sound is too dull, the cut just feels incredibly weak and unsatisfying to our brain. But on the flip side, if a sound is too sharp, it actually startles the nervous system and completely ruins the relaxation.
a truly satisfying sound texture sits right there in the sweet spot in the middle. It needs crisp edges, like a tiny snap or a little plastic release, so the ear can instantly understand it without the rest of the body feeling the need to brace for impact.
Which brings us to a really essential distinction. Clean does not mean loud. Clean means readable. When a sound is readable, your ear processes it instantly. There's absolutely no ambiguity. That readability is what allows your mind to just effortlessly say, yep, that was the moment right there. Okay, let's dive into this timeline because honestly, pacing is just as important as the sound itself. ASMR is all about micro-pacing. Step 1 is the pause. If a creator cuts too quickly, the viewer has literally no time to form that prediction we talked about a minute ago. The brain really needs that pause to prepare itself. Step 2 is the cut itself, delivering that nice, crisp sound. And then step 3, which honestly gets overlooked way too often, is the quiet. That silence immediately after the cut is absolutely essential. It lets the nervous system fully absorb the event, giving the viewer a tiny but super necessary reset before the next object gets cut. Let's ground all this science with some really practical guidelines for experiencing ASMR safely and effectively. First up, keep your volume low. You don't need to blast it. Second, try to intentionally watch the moment right before the cut so you can allow your brain to build up that prediction. Third, and this is very important, stop if the crisp sound starts feeling irritating. Your ASMR responses are highly personal, and at the end of the day, your nervous system decides what feels calming. Some people prefer duller sounds, some really like those crisp plastic snaps. And lastly, just a reminder that this should be used as a relaxation aid, not as a replacement for actual medical care. As we wrap up this analysis, it really all boils down to this. Fruit cutting ASMR is not magic and it is not medicine, but it shows how a small, predictable sound can create a profound feeling of order. By repeating that simple loop of a slow hand, a crisp sound, and a clean ending, the brain is allowed to just completely resolve the moment. It is a tiny, beautifully ordered little event in what can, let's face it, often be a pretty chaotic world.
Before we go, I want you to think about your own sensory preferences for a second. Which of these fruits, the snap of an apple, the neat split of an orange, a banana, or maybe a strawberry, which one feels the cleanest to you? But perhaps the bigger question is this. In a modern world that is just filled with unpredictable noise and endless chaos, is it really any wonder that our brains are desperately seeking out a tiny, perfectly predictable moment of order? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the mechanics of sound and relaxation, be sure to subscribe to Slice Therapy ASMR for more science-backed calming sounds. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and enjoy the calm.